Good evening and welcome. Tonight we are super zoomed in today so that I can show you the geography and the history of Burundi. Let me get my pencil out. Burundi, as you can see, is a very small country in Central Africa. It is a landlocked country. It has a border here with the Democratic Republic of the Congo, but the physical boundary is only right here. The rest would be here, flowing through Lake Tanganyika. We'll talk more about that in a minute. It has a border up here with Rwanda and a border over here with Tanzania. Burundi, as you can see, is one of the smallest countries in Africa, and it lands right in the East African Rift. So, like I've said in other videos about this area of Africa, the East African Rift, or, the two tectonic plates in Africa, are pulling apart. So that creates a lot of interesting geographic features. In this region, it's known as the African Great Lakes. So you can kind of see right over here is Lake Victoria, the largest lake in Africa. And another famous one would be Lake Tanganyika right here. Lake Kivu is just right about up here. There's lots of other little lakes all around, and a couple up here as well. But one of those rifts, the eastern one, flows right about here, creating all these lakes and things. It also creates not quite mountains, but very big hills. So pretty much this half of Burundi is very hilly, and this half is much flatter. It's more of a plateau landscape. And lots of rivers flow through this area. You can see the Ruvumbu right there. It's the only one that's labeled. The Kagera River starts up here. It's believed to be, it's debatable, but it's believed to be the source of the Nile. These rivers flow into Lake Victoria, and then the Nile flows out of Lake Victoria. So technically it could be the start of the Nile River, but like I said, it is debatable. Burundi, you can see right here, as the capital city of Fujimbora, but technically the capital city is this city right here called Gitega. Gitega was its traditional capital in very ancient times. Bujumbura was just the more economically viable capital. But there is a plan to relocate all of the government offices and official things back to Gitega. The decision was made in 2019, and it said it would take about 3 years, so technically that would be 2022. I don't know how much that has happened, but it's in the process. So, which one is the capital city? You can say it's both, really. Also over here, you can see on this little point, that is the tallest point in Burundi. It is called Mount Heiha. And like I said, it lies right in all of this hilly region over here. And honestly, since it is a very small country, that's really about it for major geography. They have quite a few national parks, but as you're going to learn, Burundi has bigger fish to fry than maintaining its natural resources, not resources, but like the trees and wildlife and things like that. Unfortunately, it's not a focus on the government. Deforestation is a major issue in Burundi, as forests are plowed down to make way for farms and things. But there are national parks throughout Burundi, mostly over here and over here, to preserve what they can. So let's find out why it is that that's not very much a focus of the government. Burundi, being where it's located, has a very old history of ancient man living here in the Stone Age and what have you. The ethnic people of this area would be the Twa. They were a band of, I know they don't like to be called this, but they were a pygmy tribe, the Twa Pygmies. I know that when we say pygmies, we get this image of little people, but that's not what they are. They're just shorter than the average height around the world. But they are the ethnic people of the region. They're considered like the forest, more primitive people. Obviously not so much today, but I'm talking about stereotypes here. Eventually, the Bantu migration swept through. There were two different tribes of these Bantu peoples that took up residence in the area. One was the Hutu. The Hutu were more known for farming, and there were the Tutsi, who were more known for herding. Over time, around the late 16th century or so, the kingdom of Burundi arose, and it was a Tutsi hierarchy, a Tutsi kingdom. So even though there was a majority of Hutu people in Burundi, the Tutsis were considered more of the, how should I put this, just more of like desirable people. You know, the stereotype is that they're taller and more slender, and you know, cows are very valuable, so being herders, they have all that wealth in a sense. And yeah, there's very much around this time is when divisions occur between Tutsi and Hutu. And of course, in like the hierarchical pyramid, with Tutsi at the top, Hutu at the middle, the Twa would be at the bottom. And what's interesting about this time is that whether you were Hutu or Tutsi didn't just depend on your ethnicity, but it could also be a social, cultural construct as well. If you were Hutu and managed to accumulate a lot of cattle and wealth, you could be considered Tutsi, and vice versa. If you wind up losing your fortune as a Tutsi, you could be considered a Hutu. It's very debatable, apparently, in the historical community, I suppose, about whether or not the difference of Hutu and Tutsi is purely ethnicity or purely social hierarchy, or if it's both. We may never know, but things like that definitely did exist. So in 1884, the German East Africa Company comes around. This is when the scramble for Africa has occurred, and the European powers all got together and decided which parts of Africa they were going to take, and Germany decided they were going to take this area. The Germans went to Zanzibar, which would be more down here and super zoomed in, so I can't really show you the area, and went to the kings there and negotiated and managed to, in a sense, purchase the land from them. And a villager revolt came out because of this. And the Germans came and put it down, and therefore wound up conquering the area, so to say. So the area got absorbed into what was called German East Africa. And even though they, built roads and things like that, they didn't try to take over the country. They let the monarchy stay and rule as they always had. It was just the Germans were above them. But then World War I happens, and the Allied forces are not far away. They're pretty much right next door. I covered this. I just covered the Democratic Republic of the Congo, so you can check that out. And the forces over there waged battles against the Germans over here, and the Allies managed to occupy Burundi in 1916. The Treaty of Versailles occurs at the end of World War I, which is when the victors of the war got to decide what to do with all of the losers' land. And they decided to give this area to Belgium. since Belgium was in control of their large neighbor next door, the DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The Belgians, made it part of their Belgian colonial empire. It was called Rwanda-Urundi, since it contained both of these countries up here. But in 1959, the king of Burundi asked Belgium for independence. After a lot of negotiations and what have you, they were granted independence on July 1st, 1962. And even before independence was granted, a very rocky, very ominously foreshadowed election occurred right before. The crown prince, who was a political figure at the time, was assassinated right after the election and right before independence was granted. The king, who, like I said, was Tutsi, appointed a Hutu prime minister to try to even things out. That upset the Tutsi population, and that prime minister was assassinated. A lot of ethnic tension occurred. It was really like you couldn't satisfy both sides. If you did one thing, you would upset the other. And there were a few attempted coups. In the meantime, the king fled in 1965. His teenage son stayed behind and ruled as the king. The Burundi royal family lives in exile in France currently. But anyway, the prince wound up being overthrown and assassinated in another coup that was led by Michel Micombero, who was the prime minister at the time. He abolished the monarchy entirely, and he declared the country a republic. In a very loose sense, it pretty much became a dictatorship, and this is when a systematic suppression of the Hutu population began. In 1972, the Hutus rebelled back, and this created a civil war, and it led also to a genocide. Very sadly, genocide is a common occurrence in this area, unfortunately. In 1976, there was a coup attempt at making the government more even with Hutu and Tutsi. That government tried to create an equal, balanced government. That didn't quite work out, at the time at least. A Hutu prime minister was appointed, and basically, long story short, it led to another civil war in 1992, and it led to a Tutsi genocide at this point, after the Hutu president was assassinated. And then, in 1994, an airplane that had the presidents of Burundi and Rwanda was shot down. This led to even more violence. And in 1996, there was another coup of the government, but this new government, instead of trying to rework the government, they just pushed for peace, because as you can imagine, there is a lot of bloodshed and chaos happening in the area. A transitional government was formed in 2000, a ceasefire declared in 2003. There was a big focus on reconstruction of everything that had happened here, repairing homes and roads and infrastructure, not to mention trying to regain everyone's life back. Many people fled the country. However, new liberation groups popped up. A big one was known as the FLN, who started fighting back, started, sparking another civil war, but that ceasefire was declared in 2008. And currently the region is still very unstable. It's one of those where politically you have to tread very lightly just in case something happens. Today there is a very even Tutsi and Hutu government. Like, the seats have to be a certain amount of Tutsi, have to be a certain amount of Hutu, and even have to be a certain amount of women as well. In 2015, the president at the time, his name was Pierre Nkurunziza, decided to run for a third term and change the constitution. This led to a lot of protests, and as you can imagine, in a very politically delicate country, it didn't end very well for a lot of protesters, but nevertheless, run for a third term he did, and even changed the constitution so that he could remain president until 2032. But he allowed an election to happen in 2020, and a new president was elected, and he stepped down. However, he died about a month after that election from a heart condition, possibly COVID-related, but it's not confirmed. And in a nutshell, that's where Burundi is today. Burundi is, by some measures, the poorest country in Africa, definitely economically. It has a very high population. It's an extremely highly population-dense country. I think it's the second most densely populated country after Mauritius, if I remember my facts right. But this is where Burundi is today. Very uncertain future for this country, but we're going to talk about Rwanda tomorrow, and given how that country has managed to deal with their Tutsi and Hutu crisis, which you're going to learn all about then, I feel like that's a good model for Burundi to adopt. And with an incoming president, it's still a transitional government, I believe. I don't think the new president's been sworn in yet. I don't think so. I should have double-checked that. But there's always an opportunity for better days for the country, and hopefully a stop to any kind of ethnic tension, because it never leads to good things, doesn't it? Ethnic tension. So that is the most relaxing way I can present to you the history of Burundi. I had to skip over a lot of things, but those things were very violent and very intense and not very relaxing at all. So I hope you found this video relaxing and educational. And I hope that you have a very good